There's a movement happening among millennial parents right now. You may have noticed it. I've certainly been noticing it on my social feed over the past couple of months. There's this steadily growing push to give kids a 1990s childhood, similar to what we had growing up, to let them play outside and get dirty, to let them be bored, like genuinely, productively bored, without immediately solving it with a screen, to give them chores and unscheduled afternoons and the kind of summers that don't have an itinerary. It's part nostalgia, sure, but I also think it's bigger than that. It's a direct countercultural response to a world that is changing so rapidly with technology and so relentlessly that more and more parents are looking at the pace of it and saying, hey, wait a minute, pump the brakes for a second. And I get it. I really do. With 3 kids of my own, there is a lot here that I agree with. But here's where my mind went when I started sitting with this. What about us? What about the adults? For those of us who long for the simpler days of our childhood, there are parts of this movement that I think we should actually be reclaiming for ourselves. Because we're having this conversation about our kids' childhoods, about slowing down and simplifying and pushing back against the noise. But what's interesting is that I am saying this to you as I'm simultaneously drowning in that noise as an adult myself. We are the generation trying to protect our kids from overstimulation while we're personally scrolling through our Instagram accounts, listening to podcasts, watching videos on YouTube, searching Pinterest, opening emails, the 24/7 news cycle, and prompting ChatGPT on where I should go on vacation for spring break. That's where this episode started for me. And then I got curious about one specific corner of the 1990s childhood that I want to go back to: the kitchen. What did cooking actually look like for our parents? They fed us just about every night of the week. I mean, we certainly went out to eat as a family, but certainly not as much as I do today with my own family of 5. And they did it without the internet telling them a dozen different ways to bake a chicken. What would it mean for us, not just for our kids, but for us as adults, to try to get some of that back? So today we are doing just that. We are going back to 1995. Grab your butterfly clips, those acid wash jeans, Doc Marten combat boots, and cozy on in. This is Home Cooked Stories. I'm Julia Darling, and this is Home Cooked Stories, a podcast about food, but not really about food. It's about legacy, culture, memory, identity, and what it means to live well in the middle of a full, beautiful, and imperfect life. Because food is never just about the food. Cozy on in. Okay, so let's actually go back there for a minute. Let's talk about what weeknight cooking genuinely looked like in 1995, because I think it's easy to romanticize it without really remembering it. Although it's hard for me to talk about the 90s as a kid and food without mentioning the extreme convenience and sugary novelty that was Gushers fruit snacks and Sunny D and Lunchables and bagel bites. But thinking about the 90s from my parents' point of view, recipes were coming from a pretty short list of places. Today, I have an entire bookcase and shelves filled with cookbooks. Many I treat like novels or coffee table books. I mean, I collect them. I ask for them for birthday presents, Mother's Day gifts, and Christmas gifts. But back then, I don't recall my mom having more than maybe, a handful of cookbooks. She tore recipes out of the pages of Bon Appetit and Southern Living magazine, or she had a small collection of recipe cards passed down from family and neighbors and a few friends. A lot of it, I think she had just committed to memory over time and repetition and figured it out as she went. There was no TV streaming, 24/7 access to a plethora of cooking shows. I mean, my kids even nowadays love watching shows on Netflix like Bake Squad and Is It Cake? But growing up, it was the Food Network and PBS. I distinctly remember my parents used to watch Emeril Lagasse's show, and you could always hear Emerald wherever you were in the house when he would shout, "Bam!" He was so animated and so lively as he cooked from his studio kitchen. Then you had Martha Stewart out there making everything look effortless and beautiful and just picture perfect. Ina Garten and her first cookbook didn't actually come onto the scene until 1999. So These were the cultural touchstones, and it may have looked a little bit different for each one of us, but for the most part, it was a limited number of people or publications. That was more or less the menu of cooking influences available to you. Meals were also fairly repetitive. School lunch, for example, it was the same thing every day. It was a sandwich, a bag of chips, a piece of fruit, and a Sunny D or a juice box. Like maybe the sandwich changed from turkey to ham or peanut butter and jelly. Maybe the apple was sometimes an orange, but those 4 or 5 components did not change what was in that brown paper bag. There was always a jar of ragu and a box of spaghetti on rotation each week. Green bean casserole mixed with that cream of mushroom soup out of a can, and French's fried onion rings, in my view, was a legitimate vegetable on my plate. Fruit salad, which I loved, came from that fruit cocktail can that my mom would buy, and then she would doctor it up with other fresh fruit. Rice was a staple on our dinner plates, and nobody asked too many questions. It was primarily the same 10 to 12 meals on rotation. Maybe she'd weave in, 1 or 2 new ones along the way, but for the most part, we didn't overthink it. Dinner was what it was, and if you didn't like it, well, too bad. To that point, there were frankly just fewer options to decipher between. Even a well-stocked grocery store, of which you maybe had 1 or 2 to choose from, didn't have 9 different olive oils and 6 different nut-free butters. Food trends existed, of course. Low fat was everywhere. Low fat everything, fat-free everything, which in retrospect was its own kind of culinary chaos, but even the trends were simpler to navigate. There weren't hundreds of them happening simultaneously. That's the world we're going to be looking back at. It certainly wasn't perfect. Nutritionally speaking, some of it was genuinely questionable, but there was something in the very fabric of it. The repetition, the smallness of the information landscape, the lack of performance pressure that I think is worth understanding, because it helps explain why all of this feels so different now. And honestly, at the same time, it explains why this has never felt more relevant. So let me make the actual case that cooking in 1995 was, in some real and meaningful ways, easier. Not just that it felt easier, that it was. And the first reason why I think that is that there were simply fewer decisions. I want you to think about what happens when we open up our Instagram or Pinterest app or Google easy weeknight chicken recipe. What do you get? Thousands of results. No joke. I Googled baked chicken recipe and received almost 50,000 results. And not just results. We have results with photos, a comments section, and people's modifications, right? Those people that comment and say, hey, I made this, but I substituted, oat milk instead of whole milk, and it actually turned out a lot better. And suddenly, I can end up spending 20 to 30 minutes just reading about a baked chicken recipe, and I still haven't decided which recipe I'm going to go with. And then we have social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, all with thousands more recipes and tips on how to make the best baked chicken. In 1995, maybe you had a few cookbooks. You had your chicken recipe, you made it. The decision was already made before you even opened the cabinet. There's actual psychology behind this around that decision fatigue, and it's real. The more choices we have, the more mental energy we spend just deciding. The cognitive load of choosing what to cook has gone up enormously, even as the actual act of cooking has, in many ways, gotten a lot easier. And the second reason why I think it felt easier was that there were genuinely lower expectations. Dinner was not a performance in 1995. Now, and I say this having been absolutely guilty of it myself, nobody was plating their baked chicken for a virtual audience, for likes and comments and shares. Nobody needed it to be photogenic, put through photo filters and turned into a 60-second cinematic masterpiece. There was no ambient cultural pressure suggesting that your Tuesday night pasta should be something more than just pasta. As kids in the 90s, we didn't care. We just wanted it to taste good and to look good enough to eat, even if no one was posting a picture of it. Now, as an adult, we have absorbed this aesthetic standard for everyday cooking. everyday living. And I think it costs us something because even when we consciously reject it, it's still there. And the third reason why I think it felt easier was that there was truly less choice at the actual grocery store. And more than that, there was even less choice of how many grocery stores you had available to you to shop at. I live in an area now where there are 5 different grocery store chains that I can think of, and they're all within 10 minutes of my house. Growing up, there was maybe 2. And not only that, there were no prepackaged meal kits delivered to your front step. So, yes, I think some of this nostalgia is legitimate. There was a quietness to the whole enterprise that we have genuinely started to lose. It was a function of a smaller information landscape. A world before the internet told you there was nearly 50,000 different recipes and ways to bake a chicken, or the thought that you might be doing all of it wrong. Okay, now let me flip the script because, in fairness, and I do want to be fair, there are ways that cooking now would have felt revolutionary, borderline miraculous to a home cook like our parents in 1995. You need a recipe today, you pull out your phone and you have one in under 10 seconds. Not from a magazine you needed to buy, not from a cookbook you needed to have already purchased and on your shelf, from the World Wide Web. Now you've got step-by-step instructions. There's a video that shows you how to do it, and there's real-time comments from people who have made it and have notes for you. Do you have an onion, a bell pepper, and some pepper jack cheese and want to know what meals you can make from it? There's an app or a simple AI prompt for that. Want to learn a technique? There's a YouTube video for everything. You want to know how to properly dice an onion or how to make a pan sauce? Someone has filmed it, and it's free, and it's available at 10 o'clock at night when you're trying to figure out what to make tomorrow. There's also better ingredients, and this is a real one for me. Access to international ingredients, farmers markets, a good olive oil. Many Americans now have access to ingredients and food quality that would have required a specialty store trip or a trip to a bigger city in 1995. And the beauty about using better quality ingredients is that even the simplest of meals can taste superior. Then think about time-saving tools. I personally don't have an air fryer or pressure cooker or things like that, but I know many of us do and swear by it. Pre-chopped vegetables exist. Rotisserie chickens are a staple on my grocery store list each week. And meal kits, if that's your thing, they take the decision-making out entirely. So the infrastructure around making dinner faster and easier than it used to be is actually really good. So by almost every objective measure, the mechanics of cooking are more accessible now than they were 30 years ago. The tools are better. The information is better. The ingredients are better. And yet, something is harder. Something is heavier about the whole thing. And I don't think it's the cooking. Here's what I've been thinking about in preparation for this episode. I think the problem isn't the cooking. The problem is everything happening around the cooking. The noise, the pressure, the relentlessness of the information environment that we are all swimming in every day, all day, and then trying to make a meal inside of it. Think about the social media landscape alone for a second. And this is something I've been paying attention to more and more. The way content is designed on Instagram or TikTok or really everywhere is specifically engineered to capture your attention in the first 2 to 5 seconds, which means everything is fast. Everything leads with the most urgent, most dramatic thing it has to offer, because if it doesn't, what do? We just scroll on past it, on to the next thing. That's the whole logic. And we spend hours in that environment every day. So our nervous system is being trained to expect speed and stimulation and the next thing immediately. And then we close the app, we walk into the kitchen and try to cook dinner. And cooking is slow. Even when it's fast and convenient, it can be slow. And that requires presence and patience. And I think that mismatch is part of what makes it feel so hard. It's not that the recipe is complicated. It's that we've spent the whole day being optimized out of the kind of calm that cooking sometimes requires. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I had to go into the city for work, and I was listening to this particular episode on the Melissa Ambrosini show. And I'll link the specific episode in the show notes for you if you want to go deeper on this. But something that she was talking about just completely clicked with me. And she was commenting on how when we are under sustained pressure, which most of us are, especially those of us that tend to be high achievers, we often look totally capable on the outside. We're holding it together, we're getting things done, oh, how does he or she do it? But the reality is, we're overwhelmed. We are second guessing ourselves constantly, and our brain, in trying to manage the overwhelm, does a very specific and interesting thing. It seeks more information, more certainty, more input. So take the example of deciding what you're going to make for dinner. We save more recipes. We ask ChatGPT, what should we make for dinner? We scroll for ideas. We read more, consume more, look for the answers that's going to make the decision feel safe and like a sure thing. But here's the thing that she said that really made me a lot more conscious about how this has impacted my own life and how I function. Consuming more doesn't give you more clarity. It gives you less. She calls it overconsumption, and she said it quietly erodes self-trust, which means the more we look outside of ourselves for the answer, the less we trust our own instincts. And the less we trust ourselves, the more we look outside for answers. So it's this chronic cycle that we spin in. And she also mentioned a statistic that genuinely, I'm in the car, and when she said it, like my mouth just dropped open. And I don't know where she got the source from it, but she said, we are exposed today to more information in a single day than a person 40 years ago was exposed to in an entire lifetime. One day versus one lifetime, which is just mind-blowing. And yet, I don't need to know if that's true or not. I know it is true because I feel it. I don't need the research. I feel it in my own body by 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. My mom didn't have these types of cultural pressures. And when it was time to make dinner, the landscape was small. She was using recipes that she had learned from her mom or were passed down from neighbors or friends, maybe something she'd seen Emerald make on TV, or something that came out of a box from the grocery store, and we didn't know any different. We didn't know there was another option. That's the part of 1995 I would really like to go back to. Not the limited access to ingredients or variety of cuisine. Not the low-fat, fat-free everything or the lack of organic produce or the lack of choices, but just that smallness of the information field. That sense that you already know enough to do this, and you don't need a dozen different sources to validate that. This is what I keep coming back to. This parenting our kids like it's the 1990s isn't something we need to reclaim only for our kids. There are parts of it that we should also be reclaiming for ourselves. For us as adults, as parents, as people who want to stand in our own kitchen without feeling the cultural pressure that we may be doing it wrong. So what do we actually do with this? Now, I'm not going to give you a system. By many standards, I am in a phase of life where I am just living moment to moment, often in what I would call survival mode. So probably not the right person for that. But I can tell you what I myself am going to try to work on because I am right there in the middle of it with you. I want to try cooking the same meals more often. And I'm not saying that means the same 5 meals every week, week over week, but just picking 1 or 2 meals, a spaghetti night or a taco night, for example, that I will keep on rotation so that it's 1 less meal I have to think about or plan each week. It's just a given. This is where repetition and a sure thing can actually feel like relief for a parent. Am I right? I'm also trying to lower my expectations for what the meals I'm preparing are supposed to be. And perhaps expectation isn't necessarily the right word, but it's just more of trying to quiet the noise, to quiet the comparison of what I am doing to what I see online, and thinking that mine should be just like that. Not the quality of food. I don't think you have to sacrifice quality or taste when you lower your own expectations of what your meals have to be. It's simply the notion that meals don't have to be interesting or inspired or something I'm proud of and want to take a picture of and post it for the world to see. Wednesday night chicken with roasted vegetables is just that. My mom had a saying, and it would drive me nuts when she used to say it, but sometimes that's all there is to say. And she would say, you know what? It just is what it is. And that's what I want sometimes for my meals. It just is what it is. I'm trying to also cook more without documenting it. And this may sound very small and trivial, but my family can attest to me sometimes taking pictures or videos of what I'm cooking or when I'm cooking so that I can post it to my Instagram account. And then there are just times where it feels so silly. I think something shifts when you decide that the meal is just for the table in front of you and for those people that you are feeding, not for anyone else. It slows you down and it changes the whole feeling of it. I want to be more present in what I am doing and what I am cooking and not trying to think about how this is going to come to life in social media for others to see. And I'm trying to be more intentional about where and for how long I am engaging with information each day, and not letting what I see influence how I feel about what I'm cooking. Going back to that whole comparison game or that cycle of consuming more information in an effort to validate the decisions that I'm making. Because I think that's what we're really reclaiming when we talk about going back to 1990s. It's the self-trust, the calibration that comes from turning the noise down and listening to yourself instead. Maybe cooking wasn't easier in 1995. Maybe we were just allowed to do it more simply. And I think we can give ourselves that permission again, not as a digital detox project, but just quietly, in our own home, in our own kitchen, on the most random of a Tuesday night. I think that's the version of cooking that I'm trying to get back to. The version where I already know enough, where the table that I am setting for the people that I am cooking for right in front of me is exactly what it needs to be, and it doesn't have to be anything more than that. So the next time you hear a parent talk about how she wants her kids to have more of a 1990s childhood, maybe you share this episode with her and say, hey, there are parts of the 90s we can reclaim for ourselves as well, now as adults. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. That's it for today's episode of Home Cooked Stories. If something we talked about stuck with you, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Follow the show so you never miss a conversation. And if you have a minute, leave a rating and a review. It genuinely helps more people find their way to this table. I'll see you next time.